Good evening, everyone. Welcome. This is the June 13th, 2023 meeting of the Carrboro Town Council. Before we get rolling here, I would like to ask for a motion to excuse Randy from the meeting, who's not able to be with us tonight.
So moved. Second.
And moved by, I'll just say Eleazar, seconded by Barbara, that we excuse Randy. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Matter passes unanimously. All right. I'd like to ask Anita Jones-McNair to join me at the podium, if I may. Okay, I'm going to read a proclamation tonight for Juneteenth. And I'll just introduce Anita Jones-McNair, who is the director of the town's, is the town's chief racial equity officer. Sorry, and wears many other hats. So thank you for being here, Anita. Whereas Juneteenth is the oldest national commemoration of the emancipation of enslaved African Americans in the United States, and whereas on August 23, 2007, the North Carolina General Assembly approved an act recognizing Juneteenth National Freedom Day in North Carolina, but has not designated Juneteenth as an official state holiday. And whereas on July 14, 2020, the Carrboro Town Council adopted a resolution designating Juneteenth as an official paid holiday for town employees, and urging state and federal legislators to sponsor legislation making Juneteenth an official state and federal holiday. And whereas on June 17, 2021, the United States Congress approved the Juneteenth National Independence Day Act, and President Joe Biden signed the bill the following day, making Juneteenth National Independence Day a federal holiday. And whereas a Chapel Hill Carrboro Juneteenth celebration will be held on Saturday, June 17th, that's this Saturday, by the Chapel Hill Carrboro NAACP, the Chapel Hill Carrboro NAACP Youth Council, the Marion Cheek Jackson Center for Saving and Making History, the Chapel Hill Carrboro City Schools Office of Equity and Engagement, and the towns of Carrboro and Chapel Hill. Now therefore, I, Damon Siles, Mayor of the town of Carrboro, North Carolina, do hereby proclaim Monday, June 19th, 2023, to be a date for the celebration of Juneteenth National Independence Day in Carrboro. I encourage all residents to learn more about the history of Juneteenth and to attend the Chapel Hill Carrboro Juneteenth celebration on Saturday, June 17th from 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. at the Hargraves Community Center in Chapel Hill. That's the proclamation, all right? Applause, applause, applause. The reason I've asked Anita Jones-McNair to be up here today is to say a few words about the celebration on Saturday, because she has been involved as one of Carrboro's representatives in planning for that event. So turn it over to Anita.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor and members of the council. Certainly, he stole a lot of the thunder, but do want to again lift up Saturday from 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. at Hargraves. And there's going to be a lot of good opportunities, lots of entertainment, food, vendors. There's going to be a community nonprofit showcase, a small business fair, and clearly a very strong partnership of community of Chapel Hill and Carrboro. And I certainly also would be remiss if I don't lift up two of our employees that have been very strong representatives for the Planning Committee, which would be Charles Harrington and Michelle Bloom, that are in the Recreation, Parks, and Cultural Resources Department. They did a lot to move this event forward. If I'm not mistaken, I think it's like the third year that we've been participating, and so it tends to grow every year. Should be really great. My colleagues in Chapel Hill will be there, and we will have a table, and so we hope to see all of you out there. If you're interested in more details, log on to chapelhillcarborojuneteenth.com. Okay.
Thanks again, Anita. All right, so tonight we have on our agenda two public hearings. One is a public hearing on the town manager's recommended budget for fiscal year 2024. Town manager presented his budget to the town council last Tuesday. Some of you made it to that point in the meeting. And then after that, we will have the continuation of a a public hearing on a development permit application. So we'll go to the first one, I guess, now, Mr. Manager.
Thank you, Mayor. The first item is the public hearing on the town manager's recommended budget for FY24. The purpose of this agenda item is to provide an opportunity for the public to comment on the town manager's recommended budget for FY24 as required by General Statute 159-12B.
Thank you, Mr. Manager. Will there be any additional information to share at this time, or just want to hear from the public?
Yes, to from the public.
So we'll hear from some folks who have signed up to speak on this public hearing tonight, and then, of course, any questions from council members in preparation for next Tuesday's meeting, which will be the date on which we consider adoption of the budget. Sammy.
Question, Mr. Manager, last week when you presented the budget, we did have questions that I thought were going to be for this week, and I was wondering if those are forthcoming or why they're not available today. One having to do with the $200,000+ for the climate plan offsets, and the other having to do with a slide that included percentages that would need to be filled by the town annually to meet our climate goals.
Yes, I forwarded an email earlier today on the offsets. I still need to get the chart updated, but you have an email earlier on the offsets. That came
All right, I
out
missed
earlier.
that. I'm going to look for it. Thank you very much.
Mr. Manager, any other questions that were raised either last week or will be raised tonight will be addressed by staff and you, I assume, for next week's meeting.
Yes, all the ones from last week were responded to today, and we'll respond to these for next week, any tonight for next week.
Thanks very much. All right, so I'm going to go through the list of speakers who have signed up on the budget. Just a reminder for those of you who are here to speak that we do ask folks to keep their comments to 3 minutes or less, and I'll have a timer set here to make a little noise. Just remind folks too to please address your comments to the council as a whole rather than to individual council members or to members of the audience. I'm just going to go in the order that people signed up, and please forgive me for mispronouncing names, which I will inevitably do. Start with Ron Kunkel. Welcome.
Thank you for allowing me to present my comments.
Sure.
I wanted to talk about, from a budgetary standpoint, the Bowling Creek Trail. I didn't see that in the budget, so I wasn't sure if that was in the 24 budget or not. So I just wanted to point out some items that I'd seen in a proposal that was brought forward. And it pertains to a proposed paved path along Bowling Creek Trail from Homestead all the way down to Estes. And from a financial standpoint, putting a path there and going over the OWASA easement and the piping is going to be a very expensive proposition if that is actually done the way that I saw it in the proposal. And I did not see this in the proposal, and I wanted to make the council aware of an alternate path. And I either hike or mountain bike through here 3-4 times a week. And so a proposal that I'd like to have the council consider as they're looking at this, either as a part of the budget or as a part of the formal trail going through here, is to connect up with the existing trail system behind the high school. The trail already comes, the paved path comes all the way to the high school. And at this point, there's actually some trails that go up to the elementary school and the middle school. I continue a trail at this point and go up Power Line. You'll obviously have to work with a high school cross-country track team because they use that for the part of their runs. But then cut over and go over to Sewell Road as a much more cost-effective way, and then come down the easement of Sewell to go down to Estes. From a budgetary standpoint, if you at least get out to the Sewell Elementary Road at this point in time, it opens this an opportunity up for rails to trails as the UNC power plant converts from coal over to natural gas. They're the only ones that are using this railroad right now. So as that shuts down, it gives us an opportunity to repurpose this as a bike trail for getting into town. So rather than coming up with another trail to get you to the same part, if we eventually do this, come over to Sewell, you can just come right across Sewell Road, pick up what used to be that railroad at some point in the future, and take that all the way into town, not just down to Estes. So I live in the area. I'm at 304 Spring Valley Road. I'm retired. I'm happy to bike or hike this with any of the council members if you'd like to understand this proposal a little more in detail. So thank you very much.
Thanks for being here tonight. All right, the next speaker is Darren Campbell. Welcome.
This is the first time I've addressed y'all. Thank y'all, Councilman.
And Darren, if you would stand at the microphone there so that folks can hear you. You can stand behind the podium there.
You'll have to excuse me. I'm pretty much legally blind, so I'm
Oh, okay.
saying that.
There you go. You're great. Thank you.
Okay, my name is Darren Campbell. I live in this town, and I've seen the services that are provided by the IFC Council, the IFC in this town, and for Chapel and Carrboro. I applaud y'all for mentioning them in the budget. My only concern is that we keep that in the budget, and that does not wind up as being something cut or shrunk down because of financial stresses. Because those services that the IFC provide more than just shelter. They provide food for people who are food, housing, and also access to resources that they wouldn't normally know how to get to. As it stands now, this IFC is the only one the facility handles all of Orange County. And the other counties around, their services are more scattered or more harder to get to. And if this one facility winds up being under budget or winds up failing, then that shuts down this whole county for over 8 to 9. Well, I would want to say over 8 to 9,000 people that I've seen personally coming through in the last 7 or 8 months since I've been back in Carrboro, in Chapel Carrboro area. I don't want to sound like we're begging with this, but the fact is we are in dire need. The shelters are bursting at the seam. The pantry over at ISC is getting depleted because of the excessive need. Their staff is running on basically a skeleton staff because they still can't hire people because they're of the questions of if they're going to be able to pay these people after this budget is passed. So my only concern is that we please keep that in mind when you're going through there trying to crunch the numbers on where to put money in this budget. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks for coming out tonight. All right, next on the list is Elizabeth Young. Welcome, Elizabeth.
Thank you for having me, Mayor and Town Council. I'm Elizabeth Young. I live at 114 Oak Street, and I'm here to just speak about the budget. Briefly, I'm a member of the Church of the Advocate in Chapel Hill on Homestead Road. I'm a volunteer at the Rogers Road Community Center, and I'm a member of the Justice United Affordable Housing Team. So the Church of the Advocate has had a working relationship with IFC for over 10 years, especially with the men's shelter. Homelessness is a community issue. Much of the Church of the Advocate's early involvement was supporting the IFC in its efforts to get the current shelter approved by the town and working with the Good Neighbor Plan since we are neighbors. And we used to serve dinner once a month. I remember that. And then also we have free Pee-wee homes on the Advocate property. And one resident told me a few years back when I was doing an interview, he was homeless for 30 years without a way out. There's just not much space sometimes between having a home or not. Everybody has got a right to live, and everybody's got a right to shelter. I definitely want to affirm you all for voting on this funding. It's really important. It is fair. Everyone needs shelter. Everybody's got a right to live. Lots of folks in this town, including myself, are privileged to live in this community and receive the services provided in Carrboro. Because I know of one person who lives on the street who has a job in the restaurant. And I just, I kind of try to live my life with the words of the Reverend Dr. Barber. Everybody has got a right to live. Thank you.
Thank you for being here. Okay, those are our signed up speakers for the public hearing on the budget. Is there anyone else here who came to speak on the budget? Jackie Jenks, come on up. Welcome. Thanks for being here.
Okay. Good evening, Manager White. Good evening, Mayor and members of council. I'm sorry I didn't follow the rules of signing up. I'm Jackie Jenks from IFC. In the game of chicken, there are two drivers with cars on a single lane daring one another to either swerve out of the way or risk a head-on collision. In the last budget work session I attended, I felt a bit like we were in a real-life game of chicken, where the town of Carrboro and Orange County were headed toward each other, daring one another to either fund a small portion of the budget for the only emergency shelter services in Orange County, or risk the reality that our community's shelters will fall short of what they need to sustain services for our neighbors. I know now that this is not what's happening here, so thank you for that. That wasn't the intent of the work session, the conversation in the work session, but I wanted to share the impact of that night on me and some of the other folks at IFC. Before, during, and after that meeting, we heard such comments as, human services are a county function, even though our local towns have budgets and formal processes that we participate in for funding human services. We heard that our local citizens want to see us housing people, not just sheltering them, even though the housing that is available falls way, way, way short of meeting the need. And it's getting worse, and people die while living outside in our town, in our community. What we want you to hear is that 70% of folks in shelter in our county are people of color, and that homelessness has historically impacted Black members of our community disproportionately. What we want you to hear is that many of the folks experiencing homelessness in our community are being discriminated against in the housing market here for needing housing vouchers because they're working low-wage jobs in our community, serving us coffee, stocking our groceries, cooking our takeout food, and cleaning our hospital rooms. We want you to hear that some homeless folks living with disabilities here in our community are not able to access higher levels of care because they don't have Medicaid, and there is no viable safety net in our community for them and nowhere for them to live. I know some of us have fundamental disagreements, and we've talked about them, about whether or not a town municipality has a responsibility to pay for services. We know there is no clear answer to that, as different municipalities across the country handle this in different ways. An IFC board member did research on this question last year at this very time for this very same conversation we're having now, and we submitted those results to you at that time. We found that local governments of comparable towns, we just surveyed a few, contributed 15 to 50% of the overall local support in their communities. They did not rely on 100% of county funding. There are surely many ways to do this. We may find examples of pure county funding in some communities, and so this definitely seems like a conversation that needs to be had before next budget season, which is what we said last budget season. In the game of chicken, instead of crashing, one driver often swerves, meaning that they give in, and the other wins. In our real-life scenario, I would posit that swerving and funding the most basic need of shelter in our county, and thus saving lives, actually makes you a winner. So thanks for being a winner this year. IFC is grateful that you found a way to contribute funding to emergency shelter in your budget this year, along with the town of Chapel Hill and Orange County. We thank you for your partnership always and for being committed to this conversation going forward. Thank you.
Thanks for being here, Jackie. Okay, anyone else to speak on the budget for this public hearing? No. Okay. Appreciate all of you who did speak this evening. And of course, all of us as council members, I think I can speak for my colleagues, are more than happy to hear from you in other ways after this meeting, by email, by phone, and however you want to reach out to us. So please do that as well. Mr. Manager, just so, since we did hear a few speakers speak specifically to the IFC budget item, just want to confirm for folks again that your recommended budget includes ARPA funding to cover the fiscal year 24 request. Is that right?
That's correct, yes.
Okay. So I think we have some time here for some additional questions if council members have them in planning for next week's council meeting where we'll actually take up consideration of the budget. Are there any questions people need to have answered? We'll go to Sammy and then Susan.
Yeah, I just want to underscore, like was pointed out last year, we were requested IFC funding. It is imperative that we have an Assembly of Government meeting with Chapel Hill and the county and Hillsborough to have this discussion in the public's eye and hash something out as the group that we are. I think we can't afford to leave it just up to the managers and the mayor anymore. This needs to be a conversation that the community gets to hear about how we're discussing this. I very much appreciate the survey done, 15 to 50% of municipalities. I think that kind of context and information can help us have a good conversation with our partners and kind of set the expectations for what is an appropriate level of funding. I definitely agree. The IFC is invaluable, and the people it serves are in need, and we need to really serve them. So I hope we can do that this year and not miss the opportunity again. I appreciate the memo, Mr. Manager, on some of the questions we asked last week. I'm sorry I missed it, just read it now. I am interested in us earmarking $25,000 for potentially purchase of 50 bikes in the SPIN program. I know there's some hashing out that has to be done, but the fact that UNC's already moved on this and it represents an opportunity for us, I don't want to delay this further. It does represent some climate action, which is one of our two main pillars out of our comprehensive plan. That kind of mobility, using the bike lanes that we have created on Weaver Street and Main Street, can further justify having done that road diet. I think the more we can do to have people use our bike lanes, the better it'll be in justifying that choice that we've made. Putting aside the reality of a climate emergency that we're in, I mean, that already itself justifies it sufficiently in my view. Lastly, I read in the memo that the offsetting $200,000 per year, 200,000 plus, there's still more work that staff needs to do in terms of legality and what programs specifically. I'm still interested in setting aside that amount of money to allocate towards climate action. I know that today the deadline for our neighborhoods program, which I believe is $25,000 for projects that various neighborhoods throughout the town are proposing, the deadline was today. And I think that's the place where most of our emissions are in the community, and it behooves us to ramp up the grant funding for that kind of program. So I'm again requesting that we earmark that money in our budget, whether it be for offsets or for the neighborhood program. I think we need to set the money aside. After all, we've set ourselves a goal of till 2030 of reaching 80% below 2010 levels of our carbon emissions, and it's just one more year that's ticking by. So we're kind of cramming our whole goal within 7 years, and so we can't afford to postpone this further.
Thank you, Sammy. Susan?
Thank you, Mayor. I also have a few questions, but I'll begin with a comment. I wanted to just say I really agree with what Sammy said in terms of IFC. I'm glad that we are going to be fully funding that request for this year. And I also strongly support the 5-year interlocal agreement being brought before the Assembly of Governments, which I think typically meets in January. And I feel like it's really important at that time to make a decision for IFC, for the townships for the county in terms of planning moving forward. Jackie, I appreciate your comments this evening because I thought a lot about that work session and felt very much the same in terms of the game of chicken. It felt like there was not clarity in terms of whose responsibility it was to provide shelter, emergency shelter. And so the town is saying it's the county is saying it's the town, but really it's everybody's responsibility. At the end of the day, I think it's the most important thing we do as a government is to provide a roof, a safe place for people who are unhoused. So I feel like there's a real urgency to having this come before the Assembly of Governments and trying to provide that 5-year interlocal agreement to sustain the important work of IFC. I also had an agreement in terms, a question about the partnership. Was their request also fully funded for this fiscal year? For this budget?
FY24, yes, for 1 year, yes.
Okay, great. And then I have some other questions, Mr. Manager, and it's absolutely fine if I just raise these. I don't necessarily need an answer this evening. The first is in terms of the benefits for employees. I know that Julie presented at our work session some possible changes in the benefits for staff. And one of those was to adjust from 3% to 5% the employer retirement contribution. I guess right now, as I understood it, the law enforcement has a 5% employer contribution, so this would be across the board. All employees would get the 5%. And I think the estimated cost of that was $150,000. And I didn't know if that was in the budget or not. I thought we were in support of that as a council, and I wasn't sure if it was in the budget. I didn't see it, but I just wanted to mention that. There had also been talk about tuition reimbursement for town employees that may need to be adjusted, and I didn't know if that was in the budget. And my other question was, there were some other recommendations from Julie in terms of benefit policy, and those required, I think, council to change code. And so I wasn't sure if we would be doing that at next week's council meeting. So I just wanted to throw that out too. Then I had just a few questions in terms of the $1 million for town hall renovations, which I was really excited to see this in the budget. And I wasn't sure if that $1 million was just for planning and for design, or if that included some of the renovations. And so I'm asking that because I know that in 2021, we heard from, I think it was called Sud Associates, that they had done a design with some renovations to Town Hall that would help make us net zero, zero energy use. And they already had a design, and so I didn't know if we could be using that design, at least in part, as we go forward with our renovations. Does that question make sense? Okay. My next question on Town Hall is, I'm really happy about the flexible work policy for staff. And it seems like that's working really well. Staff really likes that too. And I was just hoping that new policy can be considered as during the town hall renovations and determining how much additional offices will be needed, if there would be possibilities for office sharing when we do the town hall renovations. My next question has to do with the $300,000 small area plan, which for the downtown, which I was also really excited that we're going to be doing this. In that, Mr. Manager, included $60,000 for streetscape. And I wasn't sure if that meant $60,000 to design streetscape and downtown improvements or to actually do those. So I was just curious to get a little bit more information about that. And also I was curious if if it would be possible. I think part of the new streetscape will be having new canopy in our downtown, which will be a really nice feature. And I was curious if we use, to what extent we use an arborist, and if we don't use an arborist too much, if it was possible to use an arborist as part of this small area plan, just to help us in terms of the canopy in the downtown. In the 203 project, I know that I think the Virtual Justice Center pulled out as a tenant. And so I was curious if there was a new tenant to fill their spot.
Not as
Not
of
yet.
today, no.
Okay. And then I know that council approved stipends for advisory board members, and I think that's for $62,000. But I wasn't entirely sure, so I was really just trying to find out if that in fact is in the budget. I have a feeling it is, and I may be just looking in the wrong spot for that. And also, I was thinking that was going to be sort of like a 2-year pilot for the stipends, and then we would look at that after 2 years to see if it's helping diversify our advisory boards, and then decide if that was to be continued. So I was just hoping to get a little bit more information about the stipends. I'm almost done. $152,000 for police and mental health diversion program. And I think this is for the hiring of the social worker in the police department. And if that is the case, we have been getting some emails with concerns about public urination, public defecation at Carmel Mall. One question I have with the social worker is, when this social worker comes on board, I feel like it's going to be so important that some of these folks get connected with some services, behavioral health services, some other wraparound services. Will this new social worker be in a position to be able to help with that? 5-year budget. This will be my last questions here. The 5-year budget. I know that there was a lot of interest in our doing a 5-year budget just to help for planning purposes, looking ahead. And I'm curious if that was going to be done in-house, or if that was something that would be we would need somebody to help us with that, a consultant to help with us. I didn't see anything in the budget, so I thought it was going to be done in-house.
We're talking to our current financial advisor now to see if they could provide us some assistance. So right now, there's nothing in the budget to do that, but we're still working through our current financial advisor now to answer that question.
Great. And then just 3 things I wanted to mention about that. This is the longer term budget. This had nothing to do with the fiscal year 24 budget. I think over the next 5 years, it's probably a good chance that taxes will need to be raised. And I noticed that Chapel Hill, when they just, in their budget, which raises taxes, they provide $100,000 for lower income community members to help to pay for those taxes, those higher taxes. And so it seems like a really interesting way to build progressivity into an otherwise very regressive tax. So I thought that may be something that could be considered here, since we can't have a graduated property tax. Next, I wanted to mention that over the last few months, I've just become more and more aware of stormwater problems. I live in the northern neighborhoods. There's just a lot going on with stormwater. And sometimes I feel like stormwater is the challenges of managing the stormwater have surpassed the ability of volunteer-led HOAs. And I'm wondering if that needs to be considered in this 5-year budget, that the HOAs actually no longer manage stormwater, that's turned over as a town function. It's managed by the Stormwater Enterprise Fund. My sense is that the fees would need to increase quite a bit for that Stormwater Enterprise Fund, but it seems like it's really reaching the point that it needs to have more professional expertise in the management of the stormwater. And finally, something that Barbara had mentioned probably 2 years ago, and it stuck with me, was this idea of the participatory budgeting. And as we move forward over the next 5 years, I'm hoping that there will be more opportunities to engage community members with their priorities for the budget. I did wonder if perhaps advisory boards are a good way to start. So we have 2 advisory boards, the task force and the Arts Committee, I think, have a budget specifically for doing projects, and they have discretion over that funding. So one idea would be that the advisory boards each get a pot of money that they have discretion over. Maybe it's just money that's transferred from departments, so it wouldn't be any addition to the general fund. But I wanted to just throw that out as a way of encouraging participatory budgeting as we move forward. Finally, I was thrilled to see that Carrboro Citizens Academy will be relaunched in this budget, and I hope it's an opportunity for folks to get more involved in local government. So that's it. Thank you, Mr. Manager.
Thank you, Susan. Any other questions or comments from council members for the manager as he hears the final budget for next meeting? Sammy.
Just real quick one. I thought Susan was going to bring this one up again. The Porta-John, just wanted to understand the bathroom. I know the library is going to have one, but there are other parts of town that need those kinds of facilities. And are we budgeting for that? Or is the council going to receive an update on it anytime soon?
Yes, an update's coming. We have one other meeting this week, and then we'll provide the update to council.
Will that entail a cost? And if so, can we budget for it?
It will. Right now, we think it's about $150,000, which we haven't accounted for in the budget for next year.
You haven't?
No, we have not.
Okay, so that's something I would want in the budget. We talk about people defecating and urinating in public spaces and sometimes assume that it's behavioral, but it's structural. We're not supporting those people to have dignity. So I think that's something we should include.
Okay. No other comments from council members then. I'm going to close the public hearing. Mr. Manager, anything else you need from us this evening?
No, that's all. Thank you.
All right. Thanks everyone who came out to speak on this tonight. The council will work on adopting, hopefully, the budget next Tuesday night as part of our regular business meeting. Okay, Mr. Manager.
The next item is continuation of a quasi-judicial public hearing for Jay Creek Architecturally Integrated Subdivision Special Use Permit A at 8522 ONC 86. The purpose of this agenda item is for the town council to continue holding a quasi-judicial public hearing for consideration of a Special Use Permit A request for property 8522 ONC 86 and to consider making a decision on the request. And Marty Roop has an overview.
Okay, thanks, Richard. Marty, before you start, I just want to just cover a couple of procedural points. First, just want to note that Councilmember Slade, Councilmember Posada, and myself were absent for the first part of this public hearing, and so I will ask that each of us confirm that we have viewed the recording of that hearing, of that portion of the hearing, and reviewed the agenda materials from that meeting. Sammy?
Yes.
Lazar?
Yes.
And I have as well. Thank you. Also, just reminding ourselves, as well as folks who are here for the public hearing, that we are sitting in a quasi-judicial capacity, which means we're essentially acting as a panel of judges on this application. And it means that the decisions that we make about this application must be based on what's called competent evidence, and only competent evidence. I know that council members had shared some questions by email with the town manager as a heads up about things they were interested in learning more about. And just want to note that any information of that sort would need to be shared in this public hearing setting. to inform the decision the council makes. Marty, thanks for being here.
Sure. Thanks. Good evening, everyone. I have a fairly brief presentation, just kind of to updates. I'm glad to hear that everyone that was not here has had a chance to review the materials. So I will not go over the whole presentation from last time again. I'm just going to kind of jump in where we left off. So I do have available here just kind of this basic information that was entered into the record last time for reference if needed. Let me start the show. That's there. Again, just a reference map for the location, which I'm sure we all know where it is now. The site plan for reference and some features highlighted if we need to refer to it. And the applicant's slides from last time are available too if we want to review any of those. Now I just want to do a brief outline for tonight's continuation of the public hearing, just kind of order of events here, and we will see how it goes. Town staff and applicant representatives are available to answer any additional questions council members may have. When I'm done here, we're going to have the fire chief, Chief Potter, come up and make a statement. And then we can certainly stop and answer any questions you have of staff at that point, but otherwise we'll turn it over to the applicant for a brief recap and some additional statements they wish to make tonight. And then again, you did leave the public hearing open, continued it tonight, so additional public comments while the hearing remains open. And at the point you close the public hearing, you would typically move into discussion and deliberation amongst yourselves. And after you're ready to make a decision, give direction to staff as to the content of a draft decision document, which we will bring back at a subsequent meeting for a final vote and adoption of the decision. All staff recommended conditions and recommendation statements from the advisory boards I do have available here for reference on screen. And that's what follows. So if, and to the extent you have questions or want to discuss those, they're all here. And then lastly, we have the kind of the land use ordinance and state imposed rules for how you go about making a decision, which you've just referenced a little bit of at least. And with that, I can answer any questions you may have, but otherwise would like to invite Chief Potter to make a statement or two.
Marty, Chief? Sorry, Barbara, go ahead.
Yeah, I just have one question. Thank you, Marty.
Sure.
My question is about the payment in lieu received for 11.3 additional units.
Yes.
How much is that?
It's an approximation here, but approximately 700,000, and the applicant can surely correct me if I don't have that quite right. But whatever our fee for per unit times 11.3, and when they
So
come
roughly
up,
700. About
yes, when they
700.
come up, I know it's in their materials, and I'm just kind of going from memory here. But I'm sure they know the exact number and can share it with you.
Okay, and then the next question is, how can that formula be revisited?
The amount of money.
Right, just the formula itself, maybe even for more money. Is that possible? And if so, what would be the process for that?
Budget season.
I believe council could give staff direction to revisit the topic and bring something back to you. Trish is available if you choose to comment on any further.
It's just a question. I mean, just something I was thinking about. My main question was, how much? You
Trish-
said around 700.
Trish was here when we adopted that, and there was a methodology that, derived the amount that it is, but we could certainly go back and look at that with your direction.
And so it's been that for a while? Has it changed?
Has it changed, Trish? I'm second guessing myself on that.
So just want to make sure, I don't recall, Trish, that you were sworn for the hearing, so we'll have to administer the oath by the clerk, please.
Or affirm that the evidence you shall give to the council in this action shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but.
The way the fee was calculated was originally part of the land use ordinance when we established it. It was modified a couple of times. And the way it sits right now is that the calculation of it is defined, I think, in the fee schedule. And then we do we do update it every it's a rolling number based on the median income, the median value of properties sold in the Chapel Hill Carrboro City School District. So we do update it on that rolling schedule. It's part of the fee schedule being updated every year. And Anne Marie and I have had a discussion several months ago about, well, not really several, but a couple of months ago, about possibly, she was interested in potentially revisiting the structure of the fee. And the timing of it wasn't really something we could pick up at the time, and I think that, we've got work to do to bring that forward and look at other options for how the fee could be set. But she has expressed interest, and I think maybe the Affordable Housing Advisory Commission has as well. I think the planning board too, as a matter of fact. So.
Okay, thank you. That's information I would be interested in at some point. It sounds like you have some information to gather, some more work to do before you would be able, and that's fine.
Yeah. She wanted to spend some time, I know, taking a look at what kind of options we might consider for looking at structuring it differently.
Sounds good. Thank you, Marty.
And of course, discussing with our manager that too. So,
yeah.
that's understood always, sir. So, yeah.
Thank you, Trish. Chief Potter, come on up, and Chief, you'll have to take the oath as well.
I do. Good evening, Mayor, council members. So I wanted to speak specifically to the 2 entrance or exit requirements. This has come up in a couple of cases, this being one of them. So council has adopted the 2018 version of the North Carolina Fire Code, and there's actually a specific appendix that deals with access to these residential dwelling units. So specifically, it's Appendix D, Section 107, and 107.1 requires 2 entrances that are far enough apart, which would not allow, basically they would have to allow those to connect in order to meet that requirement for any housing development that has 30 or more structures. And so this one, and we can talk about another time for other properties potentially, but for this one specifically, it would have to have 2 separate entrances or exits in order to meet the fire code requirements of what we've adopted as a town. Any questions on that?
I guess, one quick question is, so that's fire code, that's independent of our connectivity policy.
That is correct. They are completely separate. So even if you change the connectivity policy, the fire code would still be the fire code, and we don't have any direct way of altering that.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Chief. All right. So, Marty, I believe the primary purpose of continuing the hearing, if I recall from watching the video, was that the applicant had some additional evidence to share, mainly from their appraiser, who wasn't able to attend last time.
Correct, yes. And they may have some additional comments, but that was at least a primary reason, yes.
So let's go ahead and move on to that.
Okay.
And before you'll begin, you'll have to take oath from the clerk. Thanks.
I do. Good evening, members of the council. My name is Roman Acosta. I work with KB Raleigh Durham. I am a entitlements manager and forward land planner. This project's kind of dear to me. I've basically been on this project since my day 1 at KB, which was back in October of 2021. I am extremely proud of the project that we're able to bring you all tonight. Both me and our applicant team have worked really hard on this project. We put in a tons of hours, a lot of study, so I just want to make that intent known that we did not take this lightly, and this project area has been very heavily studied. Secondly, I just wanted to summarize our meeting last May on the 23rd. Y'all heard our engineers speak and our experts, and again, the purpose of tonight is to get our real estate appraiser to come up and alleviate any concerns that the neighbors or y'all may have about our project potentially impacting their property values. Again, we believe that the evidence provided in the record will meet all 4 use permit findings. We believe that our project will not materially endanger public health or safety. will not injure the value of properties, will be in harmony with the area in which it's located in, will be in conformity with all comp plans, land use plans, and other plans. Again, we are specifically requesting a special use permit. We are not requesting a rezoning. Our project is in conformance with all ordinance standards, and we are not requesting any variances from that. One more thing I'd like to add before I invite our real estate appraiser up is we did meet with the Lake Hogan Farm, a few representatives last week, and we had an open discussion where we were able to talk about some things. One thing that did come up is the buffer area. Again, we're not required to provide a buffer in this situation as it's single-family land use adjacent to other single-family land use. We volunteered to put in a 10-foot landscape buffer, and we heard the concerns of the neighbors. We went back and looked if we can shift some things around, and we are going to provide a 15-foot buffer to try and help alleviate their concerns. Lastly, I'd just like to introduce our team. If you all have any questions regarding any specific contents of any of the information that was shared, we have our transportation engineer here from VHB. We have our landscape architect here. We have, and of course, our engineers, George and Drew, for any additional questions. And with that, I'd like to invite up our real estate appraiser with Kirkland Appraisals, Rich Kirkland.
Thank you, Roman. Welcome, Mr. Kirkland.
I do. Good evening. Again, my name is Rich Kirkland with Kirkland Appraisals. I've been appraising in the area for over 25 years now. In that time, I've been doing a lot of land work. I've done a lot of work throughout Orange County and Chapel Hill. We regularly appraise subdivisions, subdivision developments, farms. Actually, interestingly enough, we do appraisals for payment in lieu of for parks as well. We're working on some of those, some local towns right now as well. We've been asked to look at this situation about whether or not it has any impact on property value. We do impact studies on a wide variety of uses. We've looked at schools, rock quarries, solar farms. We've looked at apartments, townhomes, churches, schools, soccer fields, a wide range of different things where they have to go for these special use permits. In this case, we've looked at this. It's always a little unique when we have a subdivision going next to a subdivision because that is a fairly typical layout that you'd see. So what we did in this case is first we just identify what uses are around this project, which homes that were really of concern or any land uses around it. I believe you have a copy of my study already. So just looking at that, we really only identified those homes along Shadow Ridge that we thought were in close proximity to the homes. Most of the other homes that are adjoining this project are significantly separated by distance and a lot of trees, which helps to buffer it. Typically, when there's a use that people are concerned with, like this, where when you're looking for an impact on a property value, you're looking for an externality. An externality is something that comes off your site that could potentially impact the neighbors. That could be odor, it could be something going to the ground, it could be noise, traffic, any of those issues. With something this nature, we're really talking about just appearances. The traffic engineers can already address traffic issues. So distance and trees really typically address any appearance issues that come up. So even looking at those homes there, where there's only about 7 of the houses that I identified that were in close proximity that wasn't going to have additional HOA space around that development. And you can see the ones that we identified. I did also consider the future land use map. The town of Carrboro has identified this site as a good location for multifamily use. The future land use plan calls for multifamily, which would include townhomes and apartments. So the proposed use is actually sticking within the current zoning, which is actually a lot lower than what the town of Carrboro suggested it could go to. Again, looking at the discussion as what a very common mix of uses and size of lots and price range of homes. I mean, we see that everywhere. You can see that in Lake Hogan Farms itself. There's a mix of different home sizes, mix of different lot sizes, and a mix of different price points within that larger community. That's typical. We actually did the original appraisal for the the development of Meadowmont. Way back, we looked at it when it was still pasture. And again, when that put in, the developer put in a wide range of mixes of uses and sizes and price points. And we see the same thing in Southern Village and in lots of communities. This is still very similar to some of the price points that are in other sections of Lake Hogan Farms. If you look over just one other section over, you have homes that are in a very similar price point and a very similar size range. So just looking at the pattern of development, we see this to be very consistent with what's going on out there already. We see this consistent with what's going on in the larger market as far as a mix of uses to provide for a larger sense of community with lots of different price points. And we see no basis for an impact on adjoining property values. The additional buffers they're offering address that question of appearance if you have concerns on that. But even without that, the data that we've looked at shows that there wouldn't be an impact on property value. And I would point to specifically some sales starting on page 8 and going forward. We look at actual sales data of homes and doing paired sales. Paired sales is where you look at the sale of a property next to a similar use, if it happens. And we tested for homes that were on smaller lots going in next to larger lots because that was what we were looking at, and this is really the trigger point. And again, we haven't found there to be any significant impact, any measurable impact that we could find putting in smaller lots next to a larger lot subdivision. Again, those mixes of uses are just common in the area. So we didn't see any basis in the data for that. And similarly with price points, even within Lake Hogan's Farms, you can see the 3 sections that I looked at right in that area. You go from, $700,000 to $100,000 to $1 million over to about $500,000 to $600,000 over to $1.2 million and up. I mean, we have 3 price points right in there. The price point that they're aiming for at this project is in the low 500s. And again, so it's very consistent with the pattern and the mix of uses in that area. So it's my professional opinion that the project as proposed would have no impact on adjoining property values. It's a harmonious use and consistent with development patterns as well as the paired sales data that I looked at. I'd be happy to go into more detail or answer any questions.
Thanks very much for your evidence. Questions for the appraiser before we move on? Not seeing any. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Any other evidence to be offered by the applicant tonight? Okay. So there's an opportunity to hear new evidence offered by people who signed up to speak. I think, we have 3 folks signed up to speak, and I'll just go in the order they're listed here. And again, we'll have our 3-minute time limit as usual. If you'll please adhere to that. The first person is Matt Murley. Welcome.
Thank you, Council. My name is Matt Murley. I live at 126 Shadow Ridge Place. I'll definitely be under 3 minutes. I was going to tell you that we had a meeting with the developers and that they offered the 15-foot buffer, which we appreciate. But now you know that. And I don't know if this goes completely against what the fire chief said, but we had another item that came up. We had an interesting discussion about Blocker Road, the connection. Because we've always had this fantasy about bollards that would allow for connectivity, but not necessarily cars. The idea was, if we close Blocker Road to car traffic and utilize pervious pavers for emergency vehicle access, maximizing green space to help with stormwater, and there could also be integration of a walk-bike trail that connects to the Hogan Lake Trail, as outlined in the mobility strategy map. We're thinking that's a good idea. We don't know if it's possible. The fire chief might be able to enlighten us on that. But Shadow Ridge serves as the access point for the southern entrance of Hogan Lake Trail system, and we believe promoting pedestrian access from Jade Creek would encourage the use of this trail while ensuring safety by restricting vehicle access. The developers thought there was merit in that idea and said they'd float it by the town staff, but we haven't heard anything. We don't know if it's practical. But considering the council's previous discussions on street access in subdivisions during the meeting last week, particularly in relation to granting Claremont access to Homestead via Lucas Lane, we believe the Blocker Road situation deserves careful consideration. Given that Lake Hogan Farms is a larger development, we kindly request that the council does not rush to approve the Blocker cut-through in this development prematurely if you're still actively seeking the best solution to this connectivity issue. So I'll leave it at that. And we certainly appreciate your time. I can't believe you guys do this every week.
No, you're not running for council.
Thank you for being here, Matt. Next up, so Kirsten Barker, I think you spoke last week, is that right? Do you have something new to offer this evening? Yeah. Gotcha. All right. If you'll be sure, whatever you're passing out, to also give to the town clerk. Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you.
Do you need to read? Okay. Good evening. My name is Kirsten Barker. I reside at 116 Shadow Ridge Place. I'll be addressing concerns that have emerged since the May 23rd and June 6th council meetings. We believe it's essential to address these concerns before proceeding with the vote to approve the Jade Creek plan. And I would like to say, in addition to what Matt echoed, we did appreciate the conversation with the developers that happened last week. That was very helpful for us. Our first issue concerns the 20-foot stormwater easement between Shadow Ridge Place and the Jade Creek development. Currently, this easement is owned by the Lake Hogan Farms Homeowners Association. However, according to the easement agreement, which I pulled a few days ago, it will become the responsibility of the developer upon the development of the parcel. We've noticed that the jurisdictional determination from the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, based on the environmental consulting report submitted on February 11th of 2022 on behalf of the developer, does not appear to include an evaluation of the stormwater easement in question, which abuts a wetland area. We urge council to ensure that this easement is included in the environmental reports and undergoes a thorough review for wetland status, either by an environmental consultant or by the U.S. Army Corps. That wasn't in the packet that I handed out. Additionally, we've identified a few factual errors in the appraisal report that was just submitted as part of tonight's agenda. On page 5 of the report, it states that the homes on Shadow Ridge Place already adjoin lots in the 0.12 acre range. That's an error. If you actually look at the screenshot from an online comp tool that pulled the same comps as the report, Shadow Ridge, which is where the red house icon is, and the gold house icons that show the sites where the comps are not adjacent to North and Southfield Circle, which have the 0.12 acre lots. That's the oval street in the center. The report also has comps that are mentioned, as the gentleman mentioned here, between Lake Hogan Farms and Southern Village and Meadowmont that were provided in the report. Both Meadowmont and Southern Village are planned urban developments, or PUDs, and have commercial and residential buildings in a more urban layout. Lake Hogan Farms is not a PUD and prioritizes green spaces over urban layout and commercial space. Finally, the tightest distance between the 0.3 acre sites and 0.12 acre sites in Lake Hogan Farms is 75 feet. The distance between Jade Creek and the Shadow Ridge lots are going to be half of that, or 35 feet. While we realize this is the nature of new zoning regulations, there's no way that having half the green space that otherwise exists in all of Lake Hogan Farms and the surrounding neighborhoods won't impact home value for adjacent homes on Shadow Ridge. We consulted with 2 appraisers regarding the Jade Creek development, and they confirmed what the appraiser report echoed, that Lake Hogan Farms is a highly desirable neighborhood and that Carrboro has limited housing inventory and will have no issue selling. They did express concern about the impact on property values for the houses directly adjoining the Jade Creek development due to the insufficient buffer. We requested their participation in this meeting. They declined, fearing potential legal repercussions if the development were contested and KB Homes decided to sue the town and those who provided expert testimony. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Kirsten. And next on the list is Kelly Wood.
I was sworn in.
Welcome back.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Kelly Wood. I live at 122 Shadow Ridge Place. I'm coming with 2 concerns regarding the proposed Jade Creek development tonight. And if you'll forgive me, it's been a long day at work, and I have a cheat sheet that I'm going to have to work off of. First, I am currently the president of the Lake Hogan Farms HOA. In the past year, we spent $45,000 on stormwater remediation, which is a large chunk of our budget, and necessitated us raising dues in the neighborhood 2 years in a row to be able to fund this. Of that, about $40,000 was spent on a stormwater retention pond that is just below the Lake Hogan Farms Dam, which is an area that is going to get water flow from this new neighborhood is into Lake Hogan. We are also responsible for an emergency response plan in case of a dam failure. As council discussed in your June 6th meeting and tonight, the cost of stormwater remediation is a growing problem among HOAs, especially in this part of town. Other HOAs have reached out to ours because we were one of the first ones to do any stormwater remediation, so have more experience in that. And we were lucky to get away with what it cost us to replete ours and remediate ours. We've had talks of people that are way higher than this. I strongly encourage council to carefully consider the financial impact to the Lake Hogan Farm HOA if the Lake Jade Creek development is approved. I want to make sure that we're not going to have any impact to the lake in terms of silt or dam risk with increased water flow, given the remediation that we've done, and that we're ultimately responsible for anything that comes downstream from our dam. I hope you'll take seriously the recommendation number 9 in the staff advisory board recommendations sheet and request a 2-year bond at minimum. The second issue I have is that we remain concerned about the traffic that will occur if Blocker Road is open to vehicular traffic. I'm a pediatrician. I care deeply about the welfare of children. I routinely talk to kids about bike safety, street safety, and trying to keep them out of the way of traffic. I'm concerned about children on streets in both of these neighborhoods, especially Jade Creek, which is going to have narrower streets with no on-street parking. We'd be a fool to think that the on-street parking is not going to happen in that neighborhood. Nobody can police it 24/7. Now you potentially have kids coming out from behind cars on very narrow streets with traffic that is being shunted intentionally from Lake Hogan out through Jade Creek because it's a second access point to Old 86. As you all discussed at length during the June 6th council meeting, increasing vehicle connectivity does not conform with Carrboro's comprehensive plan, in particular transportation goals 2 and 3. If the town makes it easy for people to drive everywhere, guess what they're going to do? We will not be seeing as much walking and driving. Road connectivity discourages non-automobile traffic. It violates Goal 2 of the comprehensive plan, stating that we continue to expand the transportation system to provide at least one non-automobile option, walking, biking, transit, for every neighborhood to be usable for a variety of trip purposes. In addition, encouraging automobile transit increases automobile emissions, violating Goal 3 of the comprehensive plan, which states the town should reduce greenhouse gas emissions from motor vehicle use by 80% by 2030. Can I get one paragraph left? Am I out of time, or is this?
Go ahead and wrap it up. Thanks.
Okay. We just heard from the fire chief about requirements for 2 access points for this neighborhood. Lake Hogan Farms has already met our requirement for 2 access points. So I would echo the comments about, can we turn Blocker Road into pervious surface and have bollards? The other thing I would ask is, will KB Homes think about having 2 access points in and out of Jade Creek? That would satisfy what they need to be able to have this neighborhood meet requirements. On either end of the neighborhood, they could have street access points to Old 86 without having to divert traffic through their neighborhood and through Lake Hogan. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kelly. Thanks for coming back. Okay. Is there any further presentation from staff or any kind of rebuttal or anything from the applicant? Okay. In that case, we're going to move on to some deliberation. See if council members, first of all, have questions for staff or for the applicant about their application. Eleazar, and then Tammy and Susan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Actually, I just wanted to follow up on a question asked by Councilmember Fushi around payment in lieu. What does that look like? I don't know if the developers have a number on that.
I think the question, what is the dollar amount of the payment in lieu proposed?
Hey, Marty, might be looking for your help here to bring up our slides from last time. It was in there.
I have them ready to go.
Okay.
Do you know where it is in here? Looks like I overestimated the amount.
So we're proposing to build 4 units and pay a fee for 11.3 units, which it'll be a little over 375, so right around 500. But in addition to the fee, we are taking a hit on those 4 units. So we did an analysis, and our commitment is to over $1 million to support affordable housing in Carrboro.
Thank you.
Thank you. And Marty, you might want to stay up here as people ask questions.
Thank you. And I know that Councilmember Slade sent in some questions, so I'll let him ask those. 'Cause I want to hear the answer to those. But that was just a lingering back of my mind. But thank you all.
Thank you.
But I will echo before. Sorry, that I know it's not in time for this, but I do want to have a conversation about how we're evaluating payment in lieu and moving forward as well. Thank you.
Thanks. I'll third that request. I think it's a perennial one that's come up, and I agree. So the bond on the stormwater BMP, could that potentially pay for damages to a downstream stormwater BMP, or is it possible to put a bond on damage to a downstream BMP if there's effects seen on that? I was in the Stormwater Utility Commission meeting, and they were saying that it's very rare to see downstream BMPs that are affected by upstream ones. And this question is maybe a precedent-setting one, not just for this proposal, but for the Homestead one. And that came up as a potential way to address it. Do you know if the current condition would address downstream damage to a BMP?
I may lean on Attorney Brady a little bit for this, but I'll start. I think the short answer is no. It would not accommodate or be used in a manner, or it's not set up in a manner which could be used for an off-site device. It's really limited to, as the ordinance is set up, the devices that are proposed as a part of this project. Whether that could be done, I would ask Brady to perhaps comment on some, and I'm just kind of gathering my thoughts as I speak, so I may say a little more.
Thanks.
Yes, Sammy. In terms of appropriate conditions, it has to be tied to the development of the property. So going back to what Marty was saying, that's my initial instinct too, that it would just have to deal with specific development and not to other adjacent property.
Right, but isn't the development of the property potentially going to affect? I mean, we're still talking about.
I don't disagree with you, but that's just my initial take.
I remember when we approved of the development on the intersection of 15501 and where the new Harris Teeter is going to go, and we were talking about a potential bond downstream for the effects it may have on the neighbors there. So I would be interested in attorney staff looking into a potential condition, if it is the case that is legal, not just for effects on the BMP, but during construction, erosion that might damage or add to silt that is going to happen in the lake that they have there. So that's a condition I'm interested in hearing more about. I have a few conditions. Let me know if some of these are already captured in some way. I know that sometimes when a plan shows something, then it is by essence, even if it's not included as a condition, if it's in the map, it is considered like a condition. Well, a step back. Before that, I had a couple of questions for staff. One is, I think I heard from the neighbors perhaps that there was some logging on the property, and there was a question of the comparison between pre-development and post-development runoff. Stormwater runoff may be a little skewed in that if the pre-development was after logging happened, then there's likely going to be pre-development more runoff than when there's an intact forest. Do we know if the pre-development was post or pre-logging?
I was able to review your email, so I'm aware of the question and was able to forward it to the applicant. And I would ask their engineers to respond to that rather than me. They,
Okay.
they would know that.
Okay, I'll hold on that question. I noticed on condition 1, it says that the certificates of occupancy for the final 4 units may not be issued until such time as certificates of occupancy have been granted for the 4 affordable units. If the 4 final units are the 4 affordable units, there's some redundancy there. I'm just ask staff to look at that language.
Yes, I've reviewed that one as well, and my thought is that it could be reworded, but I think my conclusion after kind of reading and thinking through your logic some there is, I think it's kind of a self-fulfilling condition.
Okay,
that
good.
is to say, if the last 4 are the affordables, then they kind of satisfy each other concurrently.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Thank you. This may not be related to the approval tonight, but the third point I asked of staff was whether NCDOT can be requested to reduce the speed limit to 40 or less between Calvender and Lake Hogan Farm Road on NC Old 86.
Yes, and I know the Northern Transition Area Advisory Committee had commented or at least discussed that. I'm not recalling whether it made it into their statement, but
I think it was one of theirs recommendations.
Council can give direction to staff to discuss that matter with DOT. It's my suggestion that it would be separate of whatever happens with the Jade Creek application, because it would just be the town requesting that. They're not going to do it for Jade Creek specifically.
So you want me to ask after this item is over? Okay.
Yes, and I will note, we have asked before, and Trish or Tina may know the history of that. If you want to hear about how that went last time, they would know better than me. But
I mean, we still have 45, so I know how.
But we could ask again.
Okay, great, thanks. So the conditions I'd like to include that are based on positive response from the developer advisory board recommendations are that homes will include rooftop solar as an available option for individual home buyers. Homes will include EV charging stations as an available option for individual home buyers. And of course, the applicant can affirm or not whether I'm accurate in these, or to what degree they're willing to consider them. Third point is educational signage about SCMs will be installed to inform the public of their purpose and requirements. Fourth one is condition that access easements will be provided for the SCMs. Fifth one is stormwater wetland SCMs will be designed for storm events up to a 100-year storm. And fifth is traffic calming measures will be installed on the new roads. Another condition that came up at the meeting I reviewed is a condition for a permanent conservation easement for wetland protection of those 2 wetlands. This is especially significant given a recent Supreme Court ruling that made it so that there's questions to what degree we can regulate, since the state linked our laws to the federal ones, and it looks like a lot of wetlands aren't going to be regulated. And so the opportunity for us to, through this process, safeguard those wetlands, I think, is imperative. So I'd be interested in having staff work with the applicant on that as a potential condition. And then 2 more conditions that I don't know how the developer feels about. One is from the stormwater utility requesting a condition that discharge treated water from stormwater wetland happen by means of a structure, in other words, a level spreader, to provide sheet flow through a vegetated buffer. And then the second one is for areas where structures are within a 100-foot distance to Old 86 Road, the developer will provide a type A screen with understory plantings. That was from the Northern Transition Area recommendation. So those are 2 other conditions I'd be interested in hearing from the applicant. Lastly, that's what I've got for now.
Okay.
Do you have any response in terms of some of these? Are some of these maybe already captured, for example, in the plans, or?
I think some of them are. I have a particular reaction to just 2 of them that I'll share with you, and we'll hear from the applicant about agreement or what they have to say about that. The type A, let me start with the last one, the type A. That is a requirement of the ordinance. So during the construction plan review, if we review that and find that that they have not done something sufficient to reach type A, they will be required to do that. There's still no harm in, memorializing that as a condition, just so everyone's on the same page about it.
But the nuance that Northern Transition Area Committee pointed out was that it's an average of 100 feet, and that, so if anything, if there was something below that, and they just wanted to make sure that things falling under the average are screened.
Yes.
Are you feeling that that's covered?
I was in that meeting, so yeah.
Okay,
But to your point in going into the nuance, there's no harm in including it as a condition.
Okay.
Just to kind of make sure it doesn't get missed. And,
Okay, great. Thanks.
The other was regarding traffic calming, and that is I don't want to provide too much commentary on the pros and cons of that, but just if that is to be a condition, that there might be a little more clarity as to what that means. Yeah. That's all.
I think the way it was worded, I think it might have been Transportation Advisory Board, that they wanted staff to negotiate something. And so I don't know if that would be sufficient detail, like staff negotiate it, but, or if there's even time to nail down the specific. But again, if you could come back and maybe have that conversation, staff, with the developer, and when we approve it, like what kind of information we can operate by as a council in terms of potential condition.
Sounds good, yeah. And not to get ahead of ourselves, but if there is direction from council tonight to prepare a draft decision document, we'll take under advisement what you've said and try to phrase it as, appropriately phrase it as conditions. Yeah.
Please consider under advisement all the ones I've listed tonight. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Marty, just a quick follow-up question to Sammy's comments. So I guess in my mind, I'm wanting to differentiate between potential conditions on the permit, which are really meant to ensure that the application is brought into compliance with requirements of the ordinance, or to deviate in some way from the ordinance in a way that's been suggested in a compelling way by the evidence we've heard in this hearing, on the one hand. And on the other hand, there are things that might be modifications the applicant might be willing to make to their application in terms of the site plan and so on, that are not really conditions, but they're in the site plan as modified. So I guess I just want to make sure we're being careful about, and maybe this is more for the attorney, but being careful about what's a proper condition versus what is a modification to the site plan that the applicant agrees to make in deliberation with council. Because I guess I'm feeling like if we're suggesting conditions on the permit, there are sort of legal parameters in which we're really allowed or not allowed to do that.
Right. I don't want to get ahead of you.
I guess I just want to hear a response.
My initial reaction is by way of an example of the ladder that you're describing. Would that be, and I'm just throwing this out there, like their statement tonight that they would go to 15 feet rather than 10 feet as part of the buffer, which would be a modification of the site plan, if I'm hearing you correctly.
But it wouldn't be a condition on the permit.
It seems to me, since we don't have a site plan right now that shows that it would be appropriate, and presumably they would be willing to agree to have that as a condition, so that when we go through the construction plan review stage, which is essentially another review by all the applicable agencies of the final set of plans, that set of plans does actually show it.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yes. Amy, you had a comment?
No, not really. Thanks.
Next is Susan.
Hey, thank you. I'll start with you, and then I'll have a question for Chief Potter. Thank you for all this information, Marty. So I'll go through this as quickly as I can. There's mention about a performance security, and is that the same thing as a bond? I just wanted to make sure that
I was able to
the
review
developer is
I was able
bonded.
to at least review your comments and questions too, and sent them to the applicant. But yes, the short answer is it's just terminology. We're talking about the same thing.
Perfect. Yes. The Connector Roads policy says that to the extent practicable, all streets shall be interconnected. I am curious if safety concerns are brought, if you consider safety concerns when we're asked to determine if this would be practicable.
Yeah.
And is that and if you so the question is, are you considering that and you're signing off saying I'm not worried about traffic safety, or is that something that's thrown back to us and we really need to be considering that before we sign off on the vehicular access?
Yeah, so the last statement first, yeah, the town staff does not sit in judgment in any particular way of safety. That really does fall to you as the elected officials. But the former, the kind of how we define practicable, it's really just whether it can be done. It wouldn't necessarily extend to safety, which is more of a broad consideration. So in terms of policy language and land use ordinance language, it's just, can it be done or not? Yes.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and I'm glad I'm not the only one who has trouble saying practicable. It's the hardest word. Chief Potter, maybe you don't need to get up, but I'm just curious. You said that this development would need to have 2 separate entrances, exits, and have you heard anything this evening from neighbors that would change that position?
Unfortunately, the language is pretty clear cut. It's got to be, if there's more than 30 houses, there has to be. And it's really, so if a tree falls in one, we've actually had a similar situation in a couple of areas in town. The one that comes to mind is off of Hannah Street, to where one tree fell and an entire neighborhood, being the Pacifica housing community, none of them could leave because there was one way that was kind of out through a dirt-ish field. And I believe 3 or 4 vehicles got stuck, and then that was completely blocked off. And so I think there was a question too about if you could have both entrances off of Old 86. The code actually in section 107.2, based on the remoteness requirement, I do not believe that having 2 separate entrances or exits off of Old 86 would meet the requirements of the code.
Would not meet.
Would not meet.
Okay.
Because it says they have to be remote. Same concept. If one tree falls on Old 86, then how do you get to that area? If it's, a lot of times we think, okay, can we get fire access? But it's also emergency medical services. So who can get there and how can they get there in a timely manner if needed?
Let Susan finish her questions.
That is very helpful. Thank you, Chief Potter. Next is, Marty, I spoke with somebody the other day with Orange County Transportation who was encouraging the town to explore a fixed route from Jade Creek to Hillsborough, giving folks easy access to UNC Hospital, to Durham Tech, to the Research Triangle Logistic Park. So I don't know how the process on this, but can I just be throwing that out as kind of an interesting idea to explore?
Yeah, I think similar to what we were discussing with the speed limit and DOT, perhaps separated from the development application itself, you could just ask staff to do some research on that. And we do have Trish and Tina here if you want to discuss it in more detail now, but I guess my point is it wouldn't necessarily be tied directly to Jay Creek as a development.
Okay. No need to discuss now. One thing, I'm one of the things I do want to see, what we can do to address the speeding of cars through Lake Hogan Farms. And it does remind me, in terms of transparency, I wanted to mention I am a former resident of Lake Hogan Farms, but there is a good amount of speeding in Lake Hogan Farms. And so my next question, and this is probably totally separate as well, but I am interested in seeing, is there anything we can be doing to sort of expedite the petitioning process? Just seems like it takes a lot of time, and especially now because people just are not at home or more reluctant to open the door to a perfect stranger. But anything that can be done to sort of simplify, expedite that process so that folks can get traffic calming measures in Lake Hogan Farms?
Okay. I agree. That's probably best, just direction to staff separately.
Will do. And then I had some conditions, and I'm not sure, should I mention these now?
Sure.
This may already be part of the plan, I don't know, but I was hoping that the affordable housing units could be interspersed throughout the development. I think that's the case, but I wanted to confirm.
Yes, that is required by way of ordinance, and again, as we were discussing earlier, no harm in including it as a condition. The final plat, post-construction plan review, and they go out and put in the infrastructure, we record a final plat, which legally creates the lots, and that plat will have to indicate which of the lots are the affordable lots.
Mhm. It was a little unclear to me if any trees needed to be cut down in the common space, but if they didn't need to be cut down, I was hoping that all trees in that common space could be left there. My next condition was the 15-foot buffer, so I just want to thank the developer for working with the neighbors and making that adjustment. One of the recommendations from an advisory board was to pursue easement to allow multi-use path, extended north to connect with Hogan Hills Road and southeast to connect with Lake Hogan Farms, the neighborhood trail system. I think that's in there, but I saw that as a recommendation from an advisory board, and I wanted to make sure that got included.
As I read that, and I'm not 100% sure that I'm accurate here, but reasonably sure that there's a gap. There are two properties that are north of the Jay Creek property, and I think the concept was that if we could get an easement on one or both of those properties, that the greenway could be extended up to Hogan Hills Road. I mean, they could be asked to pursue it, but, you know, Brady may speak to this. You know, I don't think they could be required to obtain that in any particular way. Brady, do you want to say anything more about that if you understand the concept that's being discussed?
Yeah, I mean, we're talking about acquiring a property, right, that they don't otherwise have, or it sounds like the town doesn't have. They'd have to go and acquire that. So I don't think you can go and tie any property right as a condition to this development.
All of the portion on the Jay Creek property will be offered, you know, by way of public access easement. But I read that to mean the property is off-site. Did you?
I just wasn't sure, and I wanted to make sure that recommendation got lifted up. So, then I had one, two, I think just 2, 3 questions for the applicant.
Okay.
I was a little unclear if there was going to be an EV charging station at the mail kiosk. It said something like possible, but it was a little iffy if that was going to happen, and I wanted to just get clarification on that.
Yeah, it's our intention to have a EV charging station there.
Right. I know that there was a traffic study done, and I'm just curious, you know, since the pandemic, there's just been such a change in people working remotely. And I'm curious if you happen to know if that traffic study took into account the fact that people are working, you know, very, very common to have a hybrid working model now. In some cases, people are working remotely throughout the entire week. And was that adjustment made in the traffic study? I was just curious.
Yeah, so I'd like to invite up our traffic engineer to come up and speak to that, but appreciate the question.
Clerk will have to administer the oath before you start.
Do you swear or affirm that the evidence you shall give to the council in this action shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you.
Good evening, council. My name is Matt Steigels. I'm with VHB. I've been a traffic engineer for 10 years and a licensed professional engineer in the state of North Carolina. The traffic study that we completed follows, although just for the benefit of the council, this was not formally required, just based on the size of the development. We completed the study as courtesy, looking to do the right thing by all the neighbors of Lake Hogan Farms and other residents of Carrboro. We followed all standard procedures for traffic studies in the state of North Carolina, which include trip generation calculations that are published for national use, comparing different sites, historical data. And it would be unusual to make any adjustment for hybrid work environment. And keep in mind, there are different forms of trips that might happen. So consider that a resident may be staying home in the morning. They may also be leaving to go pick up groceries instead of going to work, or they might order delivery to them while they're working at home. So the total volume is unlikely to change. And looking at historical overall traffic volumes in the area over the last several years, we've seen that there was a dip during the peak of the pandemic, and it has since rebounded to pre-COVID levels. So an adjustment has not been made for this study, and we do not feel it's appropriate.
Thank you for that. And final question. During the previous public hearing, some of the neighbors commented that they didn't think there had been transparency with the environmental study. And I just wanted to follow up on that, if that transparency study has in fact been made public, and do people know how to access it if they wanted to see the findings?
I'm not sure if it's made public, but we do have all environmental studies that are required as a prerequisite for development in North Carolina. We have to go through any wetlands permitting if we are impacting any wetlands. We have to remediate any soils that are potentially harmful. That is required by us in the state of North Carolina, and all of those studies have been passed and showed that there's nothing out there.
And so it's the state of North Carolina that's signing off, that is overseeing this and making sure everything is in compliance?
Yes, it would be NCDEQ.
Okay.
If there was a violation, they would come out, or if there was a concern of a violation, they would come out and assess the situation.
Okay, great. That's all I need to know.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. Thanks, Susan. Questions or comments from council members who haven't spoken yet?
I did have one, and I hate it because it's for the gentleman that just went back to.
Good, because I had another one for him too.
Okay, so we're good. So we're good. Yeah, get your steps in. Can we get back to the I think it was KB Homes affordable housing slide that he was talking. Perfect. So 4 throughout, and then 475. So I want to just ask for clarity. I appreciate that KB Homes is investing approximately $1 million in the town's affordable housing. You know, it's really a top priority for the town. And so what did you mean when you said that you were taking a hit? What does that mean? I want to understand that a little bit more clearly, because I'm sure you knew that it was a priority for the town. Affordable housing is and has been. And so when you say that you're taking a hit, I'm just looking for clarity. But what do you mean? Are you talking about your bottom line or what?
Yes, that's exactly what I'm talking about. So required by ordinance, we have the opportunity to either pay a fee or provide units for the units that we would be responsible for by ordinance. We worked with Community Home Trust as well as the Affordable Housing Committee to come up with a plan that both works for us economically and also works for you all, so we can find something that we all are comfortable with. I did just want to bring up the point that those units do cost money when we do sell them to the Community Home Trust, because they are not market rate units. So I just was trying to combine to put a number on the robust affordable housing plan that we're offering to the town, which is over $1 million.
And we appreciate it. And that's 4 units out of how many?
72.
72.
Correct.
Okay.
And to clarify, 3 of those will be at 65 and under AMI, and 1 will be at 80, which is an additional point that, you know, we worked with the Community Home Trust and Affordable Housing Committee on.
Thank you. Thank you for that clarity. I appreciate it.
I might
Oh,
go-
Sammy. Oh, I'm sorry.
May I just follow up on your question just very briefly? One, I just want to note, because there was the slide says 11, that the condition is 11.3, and I do believe you're aware of that now, just because I saw the 11 up there. And to speak to what Roman spoke to there, the ordinance doesn't outright require that you provide affordable housing. What it otherwise requires are size limited units, and I think that's what you meant. Like that was the choice they made. And to not do the size limited units, you have to provide 85% of the number of affordable housing units that are available to you. So that's how we ended up with these numbers. It was more than otherwise would have been required, because they didn't want to do the size limited units.
I understand. Thank you.
Is that consistent with? Yep.
Okay, thanks, Barbara. Mr. Acosta, I have a few follow-up questions for you, because they came up in some previous council members' questions, and I just want to make sure we get everything covered that people wanted to cover. Councilmember Slade had a question about the calculation of pre-development runoff from the site and post-development runoff, and whether the pre-development calculation was related to current conditions, in other words, post-logging conditions, or pre-logging conditions.
I'd like to invite Drew, who's our engineer, to answer that question.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
That was sworn in last time. I'm Drew Howell. I'm with Ballantyne Associates. We are the lead civil and land planning engineer representing the client on this project. I can't speak exactly to the timing of when this logging took place, because I was not previously aware of this. So if somebody had a date, our pre-existing condition that we use in our calculations is based on our topographic survey that we performed, I believe, partly at the end of 2021 and then extended into 2022. So we could kind of compare those dates, but I also wanted to add that, either way, our topographic survey and therefore our study of the pre-existing condition happened after the logging and therefore matches 100% with what the condition is there now, or it happened before the logging, and the way that we do our calculations, it actually would have led to a more conservative calculation, and so therefore our stormwater would be more robust than it actually was supposed to be, because we considered a condition that was actually, if the pre-existing condition, if we considered it as wooded and now it's not wooded, that pre-existing condition would have led to a higher runoff volume coming off of the site. What we are required to do is basically compare our post-development condition with that pre-existing condition. And so the difference between the two would have been much smaller. So hopefully we got through all that. But
thank you for
yeah.
And in any case, the calculations you did are what was required by the ordinance. In other words, you followed the requirements of the ordinance.
Yep.
A couple more. I don't think any of these, well, maybe just both of you stay up there. I just want to make sure I get through what council members raised so that we don't have to go over it again. There was some suggestion about the whether home buyers would have the option to include rooftop solar as an option in their purchase, as well as EV charging stations as an available option for individual buyers. Is that still the intention of the?
Correct, yes. And our homes now, anywhere we have homes, we offer an option of solar.
There was a question about whether access easements will be provided for the stormwater control measures. I don't know completely what that's about, but
yes, they're shown on plan.
They're shown on the plan.
Correct.
Great. The stormwater control measures will be designed for storm events. Well, that one didn't come up. Something about traffic calming measures on the roads in the development. Is there anything shown on the plans about that, or any willingness to address that?
If we need to, we can. But again, what we have is what's required by ordinance, and that's what we're showing.
A question about a potential for a permanent conservation easement for wetland protections. That came up a couple of times. Is there any interest in that, or?
We did look into that. It is a pretty complicated legal process, and this use permit is tied to the site plan presented to you tonight. So the HOA could never sell the open space or have it change hands because it's all tied to this one use permit. If they did, they'd have to come back here and ask for permission. The HOA wouldn't be able to touch anything out there unless they came back to y'all. If you'd like, if we're going to be required to go a step above that, we can look into it more, but we believe it's conserved open space, and that's the way it's going to stay unless you all say it can't or can move.
And then, thank you. And finally, Councilmember Slade asked about whether this was a recommendation, I guess, from the Stormwater Advisory Commission. Discharging treated water from stormwater wetland by means of a structure, for example, a level spreader.
Yeah, so that speaks to, I guess, a larger requirement that is called diffuse flow. Essentially, that is a requirement that's spelled out in the Jordan Lake Buffer rules. And there's several ways you can meet that, and one of those is by distributing your stormwater through a regulated stormwater device. So in our case, it's already going through a stormwater control measure that is recognized by the state and therefore meets that diffuse flow requirement. A level spreader, it's not something we'd be completely opposed to, but one thing you have to consider is that, that eats into more of your open space. And
that was just offered as an example for a structure. But yeah, so I guess the point is your application as submitted meets the requirements for the diffuse flow calculation. Great, thank you. Okay.
I guess the point I think the stormwater utility wanted to make was providing a structure that would achieve sheet flow through vegetated buffer. So I guess my question is, Jordan Lake rules require a structure, but do they necessarily do it through a vegetated buffer? Does that make sense? It's spreading out over the vegetated.
So there are several ways you can meet that diffuse flow requirement.
It is a requirement, though. So
it is a requirement prior to outfalling water to any regulated, so it's wetlands or stream buffers. So that is a requirement, and we do meet that requirement.
Okay, great. Thanks. I guess a follow-up question from Marty. I know sometimes there are conditions that are time delayed, that especially when there are processes that take time. So to this point of a conservation easement for the wetlands, could it be worded potentially so that it is understood to be something that will be achieved over time? Like stormwater, like we have bonds that are 2 years out. I mean, so accounting for the time it takes to achieve a conservation easement, could we word a condition such?
If they're agreeable to that, I think we could come up with some kind of wording that allows it to be phased in over time, or done within a certain number of years or something to that effect. I think we could craft some kind of condition. I would turn back to Roman though regarding, if I might speak somewhat frankly, if there's like financial implications to doing that beyond just procedural implications. It just takes a long time. If you want to say anything more about that.
Yeah, usually we would have to, it'd be kind of tough because our HOA wouldn't be able to manage that conservation easement. We would have to go through a nonprofit who would then manage that area. We've reached out to them on various other projects, and we kind of wanted to get informed and learn the processes. And we learned that basically all financial, everything, all the legal repercussions would be put on us. In this case, we feel like this is open space as a part of this use permit, therefore it is protected, and it can't be touched unless the town says it can be touched. If this is something that's going to be a requirement, we can look into it further, but there are financial and legal repercussions to our HOA that's going to be out there.
I appreciate it. So for all of these, I appreciate the mayor's asking the applicant himself, but I would still be interested in seeing a written response capturing whatever further conversations you all have on these or responses you've already given.
Sounds fine. And I mean, based on what was just said, I think we could craft something that at least leaves open the possibility that it could happen. It's just whether it's an absolute requirement or not that we would want to have clarity on.
Great, thank you.
Okay. Are there any other questions from council members for the applicant or staff before we deliberate about guidance to staff about drafting a decision?
So in this case, I do just want to, in order to make requirements that exceed the current ordinance, we would have to be tying that to an exceptional circumstance that we would need to be remedying. Is that right?
Yeah, well, if the applicant agrees to it, then, no harm, no foul, that's fine. If there's any disagreement, though, then I would lean on Brady to tell you whether it was reasonable or not.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, that helps thank you.
Mr. Attorney, the standard is have evidence presented during the hearing that would justify such a condition.
Yeah, that's correct. The way the ordinance is written, you can have requirements if it's tied to some of those four general requirements, right? Like having a requirement that would otherwise be a benefit to public safety. or not impair public safety, make it more in harmony. There's another section that kind of, what Danny was just asking, kind of explains a little bit more of the specific requirements in the ordinance that the applicants state that they have met, and if you go and deviate from those, then those type of conditions, yes, have to go and be reasonable. In the way the ordinance is written, they'd have to be in writing and consented to by the applicant.
Please, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This actually goes back to a question that popped up when the chief was up here, but I'll ask you first, and then I might have some questions for the chief. So around the connectivity issue, as we heard, there has to be two of those entrances for purposes off of how it's currently made. That's the only way you can get those two entrances to meet the code. Is that correct?
Correct. And meet the ordinance as
Meet the
well.
ordinance. That's what I was talking
Yeah.
about.
And the fire code. So it's all in one because the fire chief spoke that we can't have two entrances onto the highway. And I don't think NCDOT would allow that either, but I don't want to speak to that because I'm not an expert, but yeah.
Yeah, and when you were, kind of crafting this, you were looking into that, different possibilities. Is that correct?
Correct, yes. And that was also the purpose of our traffic study as well.
All right. And just this might be for staff, right? So there's conversations about putting boulders in there, and given that the issue is for emergency purposes, how feasible or reasonable is to require those to be put in there?
Yeah, I'll ask Chief Potter if he wants to address that.
We're just making a little crowd over there.
So unfortunately, because if with being emergency access, any kind of bollard is going to slow us down significantly. So there have been bollards placed in other places. I wasn't chief then. We had different fire marshals. So obviously each of them is going to interpret things a little bit differently, but ultimately any type of bollard is going to slow us down potentially significantly. The ones that we see commonly are the ones that kind of flap down. We've had on 2 occasions where they actually tore airlines out from under an engine when they had to try to go through one based on traffic. So I would be opposed to any kind of bollard there because it's going to significantly our access.
Yeah, and thank you. You might. Actually, no. I think you answered everything. Thank you, Chief. Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Okay. There are no other questions for staff or the applicant or anything that we need more evidence on, I guess. Is it appropriate, Mr. Attorney, for me to close the public hearing?
Yeah, that's fine. And if there ever comes a point where there needs to be, you can ask clarifying questions after that. But if there's ever a point where sort of additional evidence is going to go and be entered, then we can always just reopen the public hearing.
Everyone comfortable with me closing the public hearing? All right, public hearing is closed. Thank you all for being here again.
I'll have these up for reference.
Sure. So our task is to give direction to staff about drafting a decision document, which lays out the findings of the council with respect to the issues that are in the application and that we've discussed here tonight, and then to indicate our intention in terms of what we want to decide about the permit. So, and then of course, if there are any modifications or conditions to be added to the permit, making sure staff is aware of those. Staff and the applicant are aware of those since they have to agree. So how do people want to proceed?
Well,
Sammy?
I've already shared the conditions I'm interested in, so that's my expectation.
Marty or Mr. Attorney or Mr. Manager, if we give direction about a decision that the council wishes to make and the findings of fact and conclusions and all that, and there are potential additional conditions like the ones that Sammy has raised, for example, some of which I assume there will need to be some further discussion with the applicant about whether they would even agree to have those conditions. Is that something that would happen between now and whenever that decision document comes back to us?
I would envision us as a staff working with the attorney's office to craft a draft of the conditions and share that with the applicant for consideration. At which point, if we as a staff mutually agreed with some of their suggested edits, perhaps that's what we would bring to you, but otherwise we could bring to you what staff feels is reasonably written per your direction tonight, and then the applicant could speak to that at the follow-up decision point. Brady, do you want to add anything to that in terms of process?
I think that sounds great. Yeah, that's what I was envisioning too.
Sounds like how we've always done it too.
Yes.
Right.
So we need a motion then. If there's no further discussion, well, we can have further discussion, but it would be helpful for me to have a motion directing the town manager to draft a written decision with proposed findings of fact and conclusions, and a decision that would either grant or deny the application.
Make the motion, including the requested conditions for staff to negotiate with.
To approve the application. Is that correct? That would be the draft decision.
Yes.
Is there a second? Susan. It's been moved by Sammy, seconded by Susan, that we direct the town manager to draft a written decision with the findings of fact and conclusions and the draft potential conditions after deliberation with or conversation with the applicant, and bring that back to council. Is that a clear enough motion?
I would just ask for a little clarity. The ones from Sammy were clear. Susan, you spoke to some, and I'm struggling to recall if anyone else threw anything else into the mix.
Is it better to
beyond what Sammy had offered?
do that? Or
yours may have been addressed, Susan. I'm just trying to
I think they
get
were
a little
all
clarity
addressed,
on
but
that.
let me just read through. Thank you for that, Marty. Interspersed 15-foot buffer, and I'm good.
So we have the 15-foot buffer. We have the options for individual home buyers regarding EV charging stations and rooftop solar. We have signage for the stormwater control measures to inform the public of their purpose. I don't remember if we covered that one, but it's kind of in this list as well. Access easements provided for the stormwater control measures. There was some, it sounds like maybe potential conversation about traffic calming measures in the
yes.
easement. I believe these others were addressed already. They're already addressed in the site plan or otherwise.
Is the 100-year storm SCMs addressed in the site plan?
No, that was included in your list, and that they have committed to that by way of this plan. But again, no harm in adding that as a condition.
I like that as a condition too, and also the permanent conservation easements.
It sounds
Explore
like we have
some
some
wording for
discussion
that.
about that, but yeah.
Yes.
Okay. And I think that covered all the ones that we discussed.
Well, one more is the impact to the lake and downstream SCMs.
Okay.
Whether
Just
the
some
bonding,
discussion about
whether
that.
the bonding can apply to impacts downstream.
Okay.
Separate bond for that.
More of a legal question, I guess.
And lastly, you weren't sure to what degree it was necessary to reiterate what the northern transition area was pointing out in terms of the 100-foot distance, understory screening.
Yes, that I would welcome that being a condition as well.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Mr. Manager, have we collectively clarified this to your satisfaction?
You have, yes. It was helpful to review though, so yes, I'm good on my part.
I guess I do have some questions though. So we will be, I guess, whether they agree to these comes back to us again, and then we decide again whether their agreement or not agreement, this moves forward.
Yeah, so at some point we have to vote on the application. Yeah.
Right. I guess just to be very direct, I don't agree that we should make the permanent conservation easement a requirement. That
we're going to talk about it and see if it's a feasible thing.
May I speak to that just briefly,
Yeah.
at least? Under our new way of doing this, somewhat new way of doing this, under 160D, where we bring this decision document to you, we have been in the practice on the few occasions we've done that of basically just putting it on your consent agenda and you vote on it because everyone agrees to it already. So if there needs to be more discussion regarding any of them, now is an appropriate time to discuss that and see what the majority feels is, a yes, no on including it. Otherwise, where I'm going with this is it might not be on consent if there needs to be some additional discussion. Is that okay, Brady? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I think the more clarity we can give the staff about the council as a body and our desire here in terms of potential conditions, the better.
Yes.
you're right, the applicant may decide some of these they don't agree to, right? But if we can at least give a signal that the council is interested in that, then I think that would be helpful, right? So are there any of those that we want to discuss? Danny, you raised the one about the permanent.
I mean, I don't suppose it hurts to have it come back again if they need to discuss it on that end. It seems to me they're satisfying a reasonable standard that is incumbent on us if we want to violate the protections therein. You know, the permanent conservation easement comes back to us. So, yeah. So I mean, I guess there's no harm, no foul. I just in minimizing friction here.
I think the no harm, no foul is at play if they agree to the condition, right? But they may not.
Right. In which case, you know, I guess it's not worth pushing, I think, to have it stricken from their consideration for me, I suppose. If
that's what it comes down to, is getting back to what Marty says, is do we want this to be something that comes back in essentially finished form, ready to adopt? Or is it something we anticipate wanting to have further discussion about?
That would certainly be my preference, that it be finished.
Right. So in that case, we should hash that out, right? We should decide as a council, do we want a condition for X, Y, and Z? The list that Sammy that summarized here.
Which, by the way, are just me advancing what our advisory boards requested of us, not me.
But our advisory boards are not acting like in the same capacity necessarily, as you know, they don't have the same understanding of. I mean, I don't find a reason as per the ordinance to require that. I understand, you know, sort of the area expertise that like might apply a more aggressive standard, but I don't think it's inappropriate for us to have a different disposition. On the different disposition toward the conservation easement.
Well, I mean, that's our prerogative, but
yeah, then the advisory board.
I'm just pointing out these aren't mine. I'm passing these on, and I think there's a lot to be said about making our advisory boards time feel valuable. I feel like often they make advice. I mean, I've heard this from advisory board members. They question sometimes why they even bother if sometimes we don't use and pass on what they're recommending.
Okay,
and
and
they're the ones who take the time to think these things through.
And those are all on the table for sure. So thank you for raising them. I think that's an important point. So maybe to be direct here, you have a proposed condition that's at potential. It's being talked about here that would involve a permanent conservation easement on the wetland areas of the property. Is the applicant willing to agree to that such a condition?
Do we need to reopen the?
No.
From what I understood, it was complex enough that there was an opportunity to have that conversation between the applicant and staff.
Okay.
And
is there enough interest in exploring it with staff?
If it is isolated to the, if I may just throw in, if it is isolated to that one question, you know, it may not be a consent item next time unless it's, you know, if it's clear that the applicant does agree to it, maybe we do put it on consent and everyone's fine with it. If they disagree, we put it on consent. At worst, if it really is isolated to that one topic, hopefully it wouldn't be a really long discussion off consent.
Pull it and take it
And
off.
ultimately we would vote on it, right?
I was envisioning that there might be more that, you know.
Are there other potential conditions that have been raised in this conversation tonight that people want to have greater clarity about the council's wishes?
Is traffic, a question I would have would whether traffic calming is kind of the other one that is sort of outside of everything other than those two has been addressed in the plan that we've seen. The traffic calming, without the traffic calming, as I understand it, what we have satisfies the ordinance. So while I am in general in favor of traffic calming, I would not personally make it a condition. Because because it does not violate we could not make that a condition so as to bring it into compliance with the ordinance. I mean, if they agree, I suppose.
If they agree, that's what we're doing.
It's going to depend, I guess, in conversation with staff about what that even means. What does traffic calming mean, right?
Yes.
Does it could be a speed hump, could be something else. You know, we just don't.
Yes.
Very general.
Yes.
But Danny is right that it would be going beyond the requirements of the ordinance.
You know, I've never had this kind of process feel so complicated. I'm very surprised. And I would love to have, if I was buying a house, I would like to buy it from y'all because the negotiation would be in my favor.
Okay, Chief Potter, go ahead.
I'll speak one. So traffic I have a little bit of a concern based on traffic calming just because the roads are already so narrow. So any traffic calming measures would be very limited. So I think making it a condition, we certainly could work with planning, but I think making that a condition on this application would be challenging from a public safety standpoint because it does have to go through the fire marshal's office. And like I said, based on the roads are already very narrow. And so I think any kind of traffic calming would significantly impede our traffic for emergency vehicles.
I'm not interested in being unreasonable. I like that. I don't see the need to preclude this conversation, but I guess, we are here in a continued hearing asking whether a developer would go to added expense on top of like the opposite recommendation of our fire chief. So, I mean, I think if we want to include it, that is fine, but I don't, I just, as always, kind of want us to be able to be a little bit streamlined here in our processes.
So those are the two that we have that are kind of a little bit, there's some discussion about is the traffic calming requirement and the permanent conservation easement requirement. The other ones, it doesn't sound like there's really much debate about because they really have already been addressed by the applicant. Eleazar.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And just so that I understand this, basically what we're proposing is for these two items, staff are going to have conversation with developers. If it seems reasonable, they'll be added. If there seems unreasonable or there's not a real, agreement there, they'll just be kept out of the decision, right? Is that what we're saying, what we're asking for? Or are we asking that if they don't connect, that to bring it back to us before that final document is created? That's one clarity that I want to.
Well, whether or not they agree is not going to materially impact our judgment in the quasi-judicial capacity of whether or not it satisfies the ordinance. That does plainly already satisfy the ordinance.
Okay. No,
Well, it's going to come back to us regardless.
Yeah, of course.
I think we're just trying to do here is narrow the points of necessary discussion when it does come back to us. In other words, we want that draft decision to be as final as it can be. It sounds like other than these two potential.
Yes.
That Eleazar.
Yes. And the reason I was asking that is because I'm also not married to these two things, similar to your to Councilmember Nell's kind of thinking. If they agree to it and it becomes part of it, that's great. I'm not married to it. I think as it is meets the requirements that we need, that we would have to look at. But that's why I was just clarifying. I don't want those two to be a reason why it wouldn't come back. But if I'm understanding correctly, it's going to come back regardless of it. That's there. Thank you.
Anything else from
One question.
Susan?
This is just a question on timing. It will come back to us either as a consent agenda item or probably an item where there's not a whole lot of, it won't be a real long conversation perhaps. Is this something that perhaps, we would still have time to bring to council before summer recess, Mr. Manager?
I think that's the plan.
I believe we had identified the last meeting, the
27th.
27th, to bring it back. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So we have a motion by Sammy, a second by Susan to direct staff to create the draft decision document with the proposed conditions we've discussed, asterisks by 2. Any further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Matter passes unanimously. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks everyone for being here tonight. That was the last item on our agenda. Yes, Sammy.
Yeah, I just wanted to, because I raised this over email, and just recognizing the proper place for bringing this up is with the council during a meeting. Having to do with the STIP programming, we were told that there may be still time to include another project, specifically phases 3 and 4, which have had a lot of public review. I am interested in that, as I mentioned in the email, because I'm wary of a 5-year process. The SIP process has most recently, instead of being a 2-year process, been a 5-year process, and it is a project that potentially may or may not be approved. But if it does get approved, like was originally presented, we will, I feel, unnecessarily be postponing significant funding for this project. And for that purpose, I just want to put it on the table, an interest in amending our STIP recommendations to include our Bowling Creek Greenway. A day earlier, we had someone requesting an alternative alignment, which actually is in the STIP process. Folks who are counter-arguing that we shouldn't include the Greenway do have something that has had much less public process included in our STIP. And if we are true about fairness, I think that this is something we should consider including. So I don't know where y'all are with it, but I shared it over email, and I'm sharing it in public. And I just wanted to understand and hopefully have y'all's consent for going forward with this. So I'm just putting it out there.
Well, here's where I am with it. We are about to engage in a public input process that took us 14 years to get to the point of agreeing as a council we were going to engage in. The sole purpose of which is to help this council make a decision about potential alignments in phases 3 and 4. Until we've done that, it's not clear to me what we would even submit as a project. So I understand where you're coming from, but I feel like we're sort of in the midstream here, where we're looking to get the public's input on exactly the question that would be answered before we would put something into the STIP process.
Yeah, and I appreciate that perspective. I know it wouldn't be perceived by some members of the public as level-handed in that we are in the midst of that process. So I totally recognize that. My interest, though, would be with an intention of withdrawing that in the STIP process if the outcome of our public outreach process were an alignment that isn't in the Greenway. So I would be for us submitting the Bowling Creek Greenway as a whole, and what's remaining there is 3 and 4 in the preferred alignment. But I understand we're in the midst of a process, and there's perceptions in our community. So if that's not council's wish, then I totally understand that perspective too.
The other place I am procedurally with this is that this is not even on tonight's council agenda. And it just makes me very uncomfortable that we would, even be contemplating a decision that I think would be pretty momentous for us to make.
Yeah, no, I don't think we would make such a decision today. The point would be to direct staff to come back to us so it could be properly on an agenda in time, which apparently we do have 2 meetings at least. But, that's all assuming there's appetite for it. So just putting it on the table.
Maybe we should proceed by motion here. Are you making a motion, Sammy?
No, it's more like temperature check. If I'm getting the body language of this thing I want to do, I'm not necessarily wedded to having us be on the record one way or another.
I really appreciate your trying to be resourceful about finding funding, and I've thought about this pretty long and hard. My understanding of the STIP process is that there are other projects where it might be reasonable to amend as we go. I think we've seen some that have already changed as they've been up for consideration over the past couple of years. So I'll just say I appreciate that what you're asking is not out of bounds. And I don't think I made any secret that I would like to be expeditious about trying to get to a design and study phase. I do think with this particular issue, given the burden on staff, on top of the community discussion question, which is significant, and I think I'm with Damon, there's also, even with the opportunity to amend, sort of per feedback, I think asking staff to get a plan that so far hasn't existed in an actionable way in 15 days is just a pretty brutal lift.
Right. No, I'm talking about submitting our Greenway plan, which is pretty thorough in what it details, way more so than, for example, the Sewell School alternative that is in the STIP process. So just submitting that, there's no extra work by staff.
I think this seems to me like it was something we really need more information from staff about, because I think there is just a process issue here that is, in terms of what a submittable project even consists of. And it is not simply a concept plan, it is an alignment, for example. So I think, I'm really not comfortable with moving forward on this, given where we are in the process. We've told the community we're engaging in.
And ultimately, that's where I want to engage because I think you're coming from a good spot here, and I share a lot of your thinking, and I didn't want to just shut it down, but I think it's not appropriate right now.
Yeah, and I'm just going to add to that. I appreciate you bringing this up too, Sammy. I'm just kind of thinking back to some of Tina's comments during that council meeting when this came up, and I thought she seemed pretty clear that there needed to be a more specific plan. And I'm not sure this feels like we have really thought this out carefully enough. It feels very rushed to me. I think there would be a perception it could feel underhanded in the community, and I'm nervous about going forward with that.
Okay, yeah, I understand that. The
Thank you for bringing
perception
it up.
thing is significant.
It raises a good question. I mean, I think when we're less busy, understanding that step process and understanding how to be best, like really quickly responsive with things as they go. I mean, I think that's something to kind of just keep getting better at as a board.
Yeah, and I appreciate the opportunity to raise this. Again, I wanted to also demonstrate that, my intention when sending out the email wasn't to do things behind, people's view. So that's another reason for why I felt called to put it out, air it, let people know this is something I don't feel like I need to hide in terms of what I'm requesting of staff, which was my original intention, was to give you all a heads up. I want to have this conversation. So appreciate it.
Thanks for that, Sammy. So not hearing a motion, I'd ask for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Seconded.
By Eleazar, seconded by Danny to adjourn. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
We're adjourned.